Emma stepped out of the cab and looked up at the glass towers of corporate headquarters. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. Her plain-worn jacket stood in stark contrast to the sleek suits milling about inside the building. She clutched her small, faded purse a little tighter, taking a deep breath to calm the jittering nerves in her chest. Today was her first day at a company known for its high-powered executives and polished image, a far cry from the rural town where she'd grown up. Inside the vast lobby, the morning bustle swirled around her like a tide. Suit-clad professionals moved with purpose, some stealing glances at the newcomer, who looked as if she'd stumbled in. Emma tried to keep her head down, but she couldn't escape the attention. In the center of the room stood Richard, the head of human resources, a man known for his sharp tongue and disdain for those who didn't measure up to the corporate standard. Richard's gaze fell on Emma as she approached the front desk. A thin smile crept across his face, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "You're Emma, right?" he called out, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of half the floor. "A girl from the country who found her way to our capital office. Interesting. Tell me, what's a country girl like you doing among us city dandies?" A few nearby employees exchanged awkward glances as whispers began to spread through the crowd. Emma felt a blush creep up her neck. She opened her mouth to reply, but found her voice caught somewhere between surprise and confusion. Richard's gaze lingered, heavy with judgment, and in that moment, the bright hopes of her first day seemed to fade as all eyes turned to her. Richard wasted no time in deciding Emma's fate for the morning. With a wave of his hand, he directed her toward a row of desks in the corner of the office, away from the hubbub of executive offices and sleek conference rooms. "Start there," he barked. "Get those files, make copies, and don't bother me until you've done something worthy of my attention." His tone was sharp, condescending, a clear signal that he considered her beneath the company's core business. Emma's hands shook slightly as she took the papers from the printer. She had prepared for the day, learning the ropes of office work and corporate behavior, but Richard's disdain felt like a wall around her. The other employees watched with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed amusement. Some whispered behind raised hands. Others giggled when they thought she couldn't hear. One of the young women at the water cooler leaned toward a colleague and muttered loud enough for Emma to hear, "I wonder how long she'll last here." Another smirked. "Probably won't make it to lunch." The office air hummed with the low murmur of conversation, but to Emma every word was a blow. Richard, meanwhile, strolled past, apparently enjoying the show. As Emma struggled with an old copier that kept jamming, he called out, "Need a hand, country girl. You seem more suited to the farm than the office." The laughter that followed was subdued but unmistakable. Emma hung her head briefly, biting her lip to keep from responding. Shame burned inside her, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she focused on clearing the jam in the copier, reminding herself that this was what she had signed up for. Her resolve was not going to fade that easily. The hours dragged on. The tasks she was assigned were trivial, beneath her abilities, and often casual, making her feel invisible. She filed and copied endlessly, each completed task met with a distant nod or a snarky comment from Richard as he passed. "Cheer up, Emma. This isn't a charity." The atmosphere around her shifted, with some colleagues openly sneering. A middle-aged man at the next desk quietly shook his head when Richard made a barb, but said nothing. Others jotted down notes on her unusual presence, their eyes darting from her to Richard, as if weighing her value against his judgment. Lunch approached, and Emma retreated into the quiet of the dining room, hoping to collect her thoughts away from prying eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed harsh, the clatter of plates and chatter unfamiliar and stifling. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Should she call her old friend Sarah and tell her how bad things were? The thought made her stomach churn. Before she could decide, a honk from the window caught her attention. Outside, the city sun reflected off the skyscrapers, but the view was muted by the glass. Her phone vibrated again. It was a text from Sarah. "How are you settling in? Remember, you're smarter than everyone there. Don't let them fool you." Emma smiled weakly, the reminder providing a brief warmth in the cold office. But the respite was short-lived. Back in the main room, Richard's voice boomed for all to hear. "Emma, Come here. The senior team is meeting, and I want you to get some coffee. A small thing, but important. Try not to spill it, or it would be a shame for a village talent to make a mess on his first day. Emma's cheeks flushed and several heads turned. The humiliation was deliberate, a reminder of how little she belonged here. Her arms were barely holding on as she filled trays and made her way through the crowded tables. Trying not to bump into anyone, she served drinks on demand, collecting awkward smiles and hasty thanks. Some of the staff barely glanced at her, adding to her sense of alienation. When she reached the last table, she saw Richard leaning back, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with satisfaction at the spectacle he had created. His attitude was clear. He wanted her to apologize for her appearance, an unwanted intrusion into his perfect office ecosystem. Emma's heart was pounding, not with fear but with a rising tide of determination. But before she could process her feelings, Richard's voice was back. Wait, Emma, since you're here, why don't you tell everyone a little about yourself, so we know what background gave her the bright idea to apply here? There was a silence as all eyes turned to Emma. The sudden light was unbearable. Every word now felt like a trap, every hesitation a target. Emma opened her mouth, but Richard cut her off, smirking. No? Scared? That's what I thought. Maybe this corporate world is too much for someone used to the open fields. Laughter echoed around the room, the sting sharp and unforgiving. Emma's throat tightened, her chest constricted by the weight of attention and cold amusement around her. She wanted to disappear, wanted to respond with more than silence. But the certainty Richard demanded seemed a mile away, buried beneath layers of embarrassment and judgment. Clutching her papers, she prepared to retreat to her small, isolated desk, hoping for an end to the endless scrutiny. As she walked back, whispers filled the room like waves crashing over her. Does she even have a degree? Someone wondered out loud. Another voice chimed in. Probably just a temp. Don't expect much. Despite the overwhelming doubt, Emma clenched her fists. This wasn't the real her. She wanted to explain, to prove herself, but Richard wouldn't let her go. And you shouldn't leave too early either, he said loudly, stopping her as she tried to slip away. Stay. Maybe you'll surprise us all and actually do something useful. His tone was mocking, but also challenging. The entire office watched, some with pity, others with disdain. Emma nodded silently, her eyes burning with humiliation. The feeling of being held under a microscope, unfairly and relentlessly judged, was raw and painful. And yet, deep inside, a determination began to burn, something that would not let this moment define her. She stood there, the center of attention, feeling every gaze on her, as if she were made of glass, fragile, exposed but unbroken. The room waited, waiting, and somewhere inside Emma was preparing herself for what was coming next. The office fell silent, the usual hum fading to a whisper as a Richard's challenge hung in the air. Emma stood rooted to the spot for a moment. The weight of every judgment, every doubtful look, weighed on her shoulders. Then, almost impulsively, she lifted her chin and spoke softly. If you don't mind, I'd like to share something. A thrill of surprise spread through the room. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Oh, well, this should be interesting, he chuckled. Emma took a cautious step forward and glanced at the laptop screen, left open on a nearby desk. She had a presentation loaded, something she'd prepared in secret, going beyond the normal expectations for someone in her prospective position. She wasn't going to just accept the humiliation. This was her chance, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. Clearing her throat, she began, Before I came here, I spent months reviewing the company's strategic plans and financial reports. While some areas are strong, there are opportunities to leverage for growth and innovation, particularly in our new markets and digital reach. She clicked the remote, and a slide filled with detailed charts and data points appeared on the screen. For example, our current approach to digital marketing doesn't take advantage of current trends in consumer behavior. I have developed a plan that includes targeted campaigns based on advanced data analytics. Her voice grew confident, confidence replacing the uncertainty. Implementing these strategies could significantly increase our market share within a year. Emma's fingers moved quickly, scrolling through slides that depicted detailed market analyses, competitive landscapes, and innovative product development ideas. Every graph, every insight was precise and well-researched. The staff who had been grinning moments before now leaned forward, their eyes wide with surprise. Richard's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. The people around him exchanged glances, suddenly shifting from amusement to intrigue. "That's detailed," muttered one of the senior managers, a woman who had maintained a stony expression until now. "Where did you get that information?" Emma glanced up briefly, meeting the eyes of her audience. "I accessed the company's public financial statements, industry reports, and interviewed some former employees as part of my research. I also scrutinized customer reviews and market trends." A young analyst whispered to a colleague, "She's right. This could actually work." Richard's usually cool demeanor cracked as irritation surfaced. "You've obviously spent a lot of time on this. But since when does a new employee, especially one who looks like he just stepped off a farm, have the right or understanding to suggest company strategy?" Emma met his gaze calmly. "I don't want to overstep my bounds, but the facts speak for themselves. The plan I proposed is ready to be implemented with only minor adjustments. The only thing missing is commitment." A murmur of approval swept through the room. Several employees nodded, whispering words of encouragement. Richard's expression darkened. For a moment, he thought he was about to dismiss the whole thing with a sarcastic remark, but the changing energy in the room stopped him. Emma continued, "If you're open to a deeper discussion, I'm willing to work with the team to refine these ideas and present a formal proposal." Her voice was calm, professional, a sudden change from the farm girl he'd lashed out at earlier. One of the senior executives stood up, breaking the tension. "Emma, your ideas are impressive. It's clear you have a good sense of where the company is and where it could go." Richard's triumphant smile faded, replaced by a thin line of silence. His eyes darted between Emma and the others, taking in the prestige and respect she'd suddenly earned. Emma finished by thanking everyone for their time, feeling a surge of relief but also determination. They applauded, not the polite, obligatory clap, but genuine approval and surprise. Richard was silent, his old brutal bravado replaced by a grudging recognition. Emma caught his sideways glance, a mixture of grudging respect and distrust. As the meeting ended, employees approached Emma with questions, offers of collaboration, and subtle congratulations. Murmurs of admiration, mixed with surprise, filled the air of the office. That day, the invisible barrier between Emma and the rest of the company began to crumble, shattering Richard's preconceptions and the dismissive attitude that had surrounded her. Emma stood in the middle of a changed room, no longer just the awkward newcomer, but a figure worthy of attention and respect. And in that moment, she felt a quiet victory, a promise of what was possible even when the odds seemed against you. As murmurs of surprise and curiosity quietly swept through the office, Emma allowed herself a brief moment of calm before addressing the group again. Her gaze slid over the now attentive faces, knowing that the silence had been broken and a new chapter had begun. "I owe you an explanation," she said softly but firmly. The room straightened, chairs pushed back, and heads turned in anticipation. Emma continued, "My name is Emma Parker. I am the newly appointed CEO of this company." There was a stunned silence, eyebrows raised, jaws dropped. For a company that thrived on power and status, the revelation was seismic. Emma, the plainly dressed newbie who had been fired and ridiculed that morning, was the leader of the entire organization. The very fabric of assumptions had unraveled. She smiled softly, feeling a swirl of thoughts and distrust. "I had decided to come here quietly, unannounced. I wanted to see how my team would treat someone who looked different from the usual corporate standard. I wanted to learn firsthand about the culture and values in practice, beyond the polished mission statements." The story behind Emma's plain clothes unfolded carefully, step by step. "I grew up in a rural town, far from the hustle and bustle of the city and corporate chaos. Simplicity had always been a choice for me, not a constraint. My upbringing taught me resilience, humility, and the importance of hard work and integrity." She paused, meeting the eyes of several who were still processing her words. "The clothes I wore today are not an indication of my abilities or my worth. I value substance and actions over appearance." There was a quiet strength in Emma's voice that rippled through the room. I wanted to remind everyone here, myself included, that value lies in effort, knowledge, and character, not the label of a suit or the brand of a bag. Several of the staff exchanged glances, taking in the unfamiliar but inspiring perspective. Whispers spread about her volunteer experience and her leadership philosophy, which focused on inclusivity and growth from the bottom up. Emma pulled her chair closer to the front and sat down, lowering her voice slightly. I have worked for years in a variety of sectors, from grassroots initiatives to senior management. I have learned that for success to be real and lasting, you need to create an environment where every voice is heard and every spirit is respected. She thought for a moment, remembering earlier experiences of Richard's ridicule, the sneers, the isolation. Today's experience had been instructive even for me, but it confirmed why change was needed. We need to create a culture where people are valued for who they are, not rejected because of where they come from or what they look like. Emma's candor had changed the atmosphere. What had been tension and judgment was now opportunity and understanding. She looked around at the faces in front of her, some respectful, some hesitant, all awakened to the challenge. I'll be meeting with many of you individually in the coming weeks, she explained, to listen to your ideas, your concerns, and your hopes for this company. Together, we will create a future where innovation meets empathy. A hand rose gently from behind. A young employee, hesitant but eager to understand. Emma nodded encouragingly. Miss Parker, the young woman said, how do you envision changing the attitudes here among management and staff? Emma's eyes softened. I believe change begins with example. We will encourage open communication, value diversity of opinion, and hold ourselves accountable for respect in the workplace. Leadership must be accessible and transparent. Judgment and prejudice have no place here. Another staffer leaned forward, a middle-aged man who had been watching with concern. How will we all overcome the differences that have arisen? Emma's gaze was firm. Recognizing that each person brings value, embracing the humility to admit when we are wrong, and receiving support to correct our course. I want everyone here to feel like they belong, not just for productivity, but because people matter. Something new stirred. Hope mingled with cautious optimism. Emma, once a symbol of exclusion, now embodied a vision of inclusion and growth. As the meeting ended, Emma felt a renewed purpose connecting her past and present. From the quiet fields of her childhood to this high-rise office building, her journey had taught her to rise above judgment and lead with oneness of heart and mind. Walking through the halls later, co-workers greeted her with warm nods and, in some cases, shy smiles. Several people approached, wanting to collaborate or simply thank her for her openness. Her simple clothes now attracted fewer curious glances. Instead, there was an acknowledgement of the essence beneath the surface. Emma paused at the window, looking out over the cityscape, bathed in the afternoon sun. She took a deep breath, calm and energized. Uncovering her identity was not just a personal rehabilitation. It was the beginning of a transformation that went beyond titles and appearances. The future awaited, uncertain but bright, shaped by a shared commitment to lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. Emma Parker, the country girl turned CEO, knew that her story was not just about her, but about everyone who struggled to be seen and heard in a judgmental world. And with that in mind, she stepped forward, ready for the next steps on this remarkable journey. In the days following Emma's revelation, the atmosphere at the company changed noticeably. The office corridors no longer echoed with whispers of ridicule or questionable glances. Instead, they buzzed with an energetic sense of possibility and respect. Emma assumed her new role with a deep confidence that inspired those around her, bridging the gap between the leader's vision and the experience of her staff. Richard, however, found himself increasingly isolated. The cold smiles and condescending remarks that had once defined his leadership had lost their power under the fresh gaze of management. Slowly but inevitably, the consequences of his past behavior became clear. At one of the weekly management meetings, the board discussed his behavior. Richard, the chair, began, calmly but firmly. We have become aware of your attitude towards Emma Parker and others who do not fit the traditional corporate image. Such behavior is incompatible with the culture we are seeking to build. As a result, we are placing you on administrative leave while we review your role here." The room nodded in unison, a collective acknowledgement of the need for change. A look of hidden remorse briefly crossed Richard's face as the weight of responsibility pressed down on him. The once unwavering head of HR was facing a reckoning not from outside forces, but from a shift in values that left no room for intolerance or prejudice. Shortly after, Richard asked for a private meeting with Emma, trying to confront the implications of his previous actions. Sitting across from her in the quiet office, he spoke with unusual humility. "Emma, I was wrong about you. I allowed my prejudices to cloud my judgment, and for that, I apologize. If there's anything I can do to make amends, please tell me." Emma looked at him thoughtfully, the tension in the room palpable, but tempered by her grace. "Acknowledging your mistakes is an important first step, Richard," she said softly. "The way forward is through learning and genuine change. I hope you'll take this opportunity to reflect and change." With that, she stood up, signaling an ending that was more hopeful than punitive, an opportunity for redemption based on authenticity rather than resentment. Emma's leadership, meanwhile, flourished as she implemented strategies to create a more inclusive culture. Open forums, mentoring programs, and ongoing dialogues about respect and collaboration became cornerstones of her work. Her presence was a daily reminder that leadership was as much about empathy as it was about intellect. Colleagues who had once doubted her became her enthusiastic supporters. Sarah, Emma's closest friend and confidant, marveled at the transformation. "You turned a tough beginning into a powerful story," she said proudly. "You showed the company and the world that it's the person behind the label that really matters." Within weeks, Emma found herself walking around the office with a different sense of belonging. By greeting employees by name, sharing stories, and listening attentively, she was building bridges that had previously seemed impossible. On a cool Friday afternoon, with the sun streaming warmly through the tall windows, Emma stood before the group at a meeting. Her voice was clear and firm. "We've all seen what happens when we're blinded by bias, but we've also seen what's possible when we choose respect, inclusion, and openness. My journey here hasn't just been about proving my own worth. It's about showing that each of us has value, no matter our background or appearance. Together we are stronger." The applause that followed was genuine, heartfelt, a tribute not just to her leadership, but to the culture she'd helped build. When the meeting ended, Emma felt deeply satisfied, the culmination of struggle, resilience, and triumph. She looked at the faces in front of her, not strangers or naysayers, but colleagues and friends. Her journey from rural to corporate was more than just a personal triumph. It was a beacon of change for a workplace that embraced differences and valued true worth. Emma's story ended with an open call to the audience. What would you do if you were treated unfairly like this? Would you stand your ground or back down? Share your thoughts in the comments below. She smiled warmly, the energy still buzzing in the room. If this story touched you, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to stay in touch. We'll see you in our next story. With those words, a new chapter began. Not just for Emma, but for everyone who dared to challenge expectations and believe in their own worth.